So, hi everyone, I'm Sunyi and I manage the Urban Water Small Grants Program. I wanted to start off today's webinar just to congratulate all of our 2014 recipients. We're really excited to have you on board. We had a really competitive pool of applicants this cycle, and so this group of 37 is really the cream of the crop and the best and most innovative projects that were put forward for this grant. So congratulations again on being selected, and we look forward to working with you over the next 2 years. So as you all know, the purpose of today's call is to provide you important information so that you can successfully manage your grant. And I know that managing an EPA cooperative agreement can be really overwhelming, especially for those who are new to the process and to the federal grant world. But we hope that through the training today that you'll be more confident in managing your grant, and you'll find the information that's shared to be really helpful for you. On an administrative note, we just wanted to make sure that folks are aware that this is required training for all of the 2014 recipients, and that grantees should affirm that they've completed this training in their semi-annual report that's submitted to your project officers. And just to confirm, Deanna, this session is being recorded,
Yes,
correct,
it
for
is.
folks so they can access it at a later time?
Yes.
So that'll be also made available to you, I guess, after today for you to reference if needed in the future, to revisit certain parts of information that of the training that's that we go over in the webinar today. But before we get started, I wanted to take, or we wanted to take the first few minutes of the webinar just to orient you to the Urban Waters Learning Network. One of the great benefits of being a recipient is getting connected to the Urban Waters Learning Network, which is a peer exchange network funded by the EPA and led in partnership between River Network and Groundwork USA. Our coordinators are Deanna Toledo from River Network and Anne-Marie Mitra from Groundwork USA. And some of you have probably become familiar with them over the past few months with various Learning Network communications, either getting a Basecamp account, or maybe you've already attended some of the Learning Network webinars that's been offered through this network. So I'm just going to hand things over to Deanna just to provide some more information about the network to folks.
All right, thank you, Sun. So yes, I think I know a lot of you in person, a number of you I've been emailing and on the phone with. So just really briefly, because I think most of you hopefully by now are on Basecamp, and that's how you heard about this webinar training, and are already part of the Learning Network. So just really briefly though, this is a picture that we took a couple of years ago, a face-to-face meeting of some of the folks in the Learning Network. Some of you are on the phone right now, in fact, because you've received another grant, so congratulations. So really, the Urban Waters Learning Network it's a resource for you, and hopefully it's a go-to place where you can tap into peers around the country who are doing similar work to what you're doing. There's no need to recreate the wheel, is what I like to say, and because many times, whether you're working on green infrastructure projects or working with youth, there are other folks within the Learning Network that are doing similar work, facing similar challenges, and maybe have useful tools that could be helpful to you. So we really are hoping that you turn to the Learning Network as a resource and tap into it to amplify the impact of your work and help you deal with maybe some of the barriers that pop up along the way. So the Learning Network, there's two of us who are coordinators of the Learning Network. You see me there on the bottom, Deanna Toledo. So there's two organizations, my own organization, River Network, and Groundwork USA, and I know you've seen Anne-Marie Mitrov's emails come through as well. We are co-coordinators of the Learning Network. There's our contact information so you can find us. Our organizations basically are under contract with EPA to coordinate the network. Whereas River Network, my organization based in Portland, Oregon, is in essence a capacity building organization providing training to help you raise money, put together effective boards and leadership for your programs, plan advocacy campaigns, technical trainings, etc. That's what we do. Groundwork USA's perspective is a little bit different. Groundwork is another network of organizations that are really embedded in the community and practitioners in the community. Many of those organizations are doing urban waters work, but they also do a whole host of other kinds of programs, green teams, brownfields redevelopment, etc. So between the two of us, we bring lots of on-the-ground experience and organizational development experience, and we hope that to be resources for all of you through doing that. What it is, a peer-to-peer network, basically. All of you are working to restore and revitalize both the urban waters and the communities that surround those urban waters. We hope to strengthen the effectiveness of your work by giving you opportunities to both share your experiences, gain skills through trainings, and tap into existing technical resources that exist within the network and resources that exist outside of the network, whether it's in various agencies or other places that we can point you to as you share your needs with us. So who is in the Learning Network? It is all of you who receive Urban Water Small Grants. Some of you are existing grantees, previous grantees, grants that come through EPA directly or through NIFWIF. And we've also opened it up to other folks who are doing excellent urban waters work, and they may not have tapped into these grants. So the whole roster, if you go into Basecamp, I think we're almost close to 200 people, and EPA staff as well who are involved in the Learning Network. In terms of just a rough overview, what it provides, it's an online space using Basecamp to post questions, to post your own documents and tools that you found helpful, and make requests for such tools if there's something you need and you expect that somebody knows of a tool that might be helpful. So Basecamp really is where we do all of that exchange of documents and resources and communications. So if you're not on Basecamp, send me an email after this, and I'll get you in there. It's also a vehicle to facilitate communication between the grantees, urban waters practitioners, and EPA staff. So you'll see oftentimes when a question is posted on Basecamp, it's an EPA staffer who will respond. So it's a great, more informal way of relating to one another outside of the grantor-grantee or program officer relationship. And it's a source of training and support, webinars, peer calls, in-person gatherings like we'll have at River Rally, and consulting. But we only know to put together webinars and peer calls around topics that could be of interest if you tell us what those very topics need to be. So we are always open, Anne-Marie and I, if you are coming upon a challenge, whether it is how to create fee-for-service work out of green infrastructure projects, whether it is how to put together a QAP for water quality monitoring program. Let me ask, I think I'm hearing my echo, so if you're on the phone, please mute your computer speaker. So yes, anything, any topic, if you're finding yourself challenged by something or just need a peer group of folks to brainstorm around that topic with, let us know. Say, hey, I would love to, see if there's interest within the Learning Network to have a conversation about this. And we've had some very successful peer-to-peer calls around various topics, and usually it's in response to somebody requesting that. And it's also a chance to highlight your own work. So promoting your project through the website that we've created, urbanwaterslearningnetworks.org, and you know we've come to a number of you asking, can we highlight your project? And so all of the stories are being uploaded there, and it's a chance to highlight your work to a bigger audience than maybe locally you might find. So if you'd like to be highlighted and promoted that way, let us know. We'd like to get the good stories out. So then just finally, today's webinar is required. There's a number of other trainings that are already scheduled, and you'll have information on Basecamp about them and how to register. And I've got the two of them up there, Green Infrastructure Peer-to-Peer Call, and then there's an upcoming webinar on urban buffers, hearing from a local government representative, help you think how to build leadership for urban buffers work. And finally, 2015 National River Rally, which you'll be hearing more about through Basecamp as the date nears, but it is a requirement of grantees to attend the face-to-face meeting that we will host of the Learning Network there. So I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of you in person there and seeing a lot of you again. So I think that's basically all. That's it in a nutshell. I welcome input. I welcome questions, and I'll say that for Anne Marie and myself, and look forward to helping you in whatever ways we can. So with that, I will turn it back to Sun.
Great, thanks, Deanna. So we'll move into our the grants training, management training portion of the webinar. So our presenter today is Donna Miller, and she is currently the Grants Management Officer, or GMO, in EPA Region 6 in Dallas, Texas. She has been the Region 6 GMO for the past 3 years. Prior to taking that position, she was a supervisor in Region 6's Office of Water for 15 years, managing various Clean Water and Safe Drinking Water Act grant programs. She's been with the EPA for a total of 30 years and has worked in various programs in Region 6. Also supporting Donna in today's training is Wendy Ross, who is a Region 6 Grants Management Specialist. Wendy manages several programs in the Region 6 Grants Office, including Urban Waters Grants. And I also wanted to say an acknowledgement to Jennifer Osley from EPA Region 7. She can't be with us today due to an illness, but she was the behind-the-scenes person in working with Donna and Deanna in putting this webinar training together. And I guess, are there any administrative notes to point out, Deanna, for folks about like Q&A and Q&A, when to use the chat box for the questions, or I know I signed on late, so that may have already been covered already. So
yeah, I would just say please type in your questions. Donna will stop periodically, but type your questions as they come to mind into the chat box, and we'll just make sure she notices all of them. I'll be helping her do that.
Okay. Great. Yeah. So, Donna, we hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sun, and thank you, Deanna. Welcome, everyone. I appreciate this opportunity to go through this training with you. You'll recognize a lot of the training material from last year's training session. I got the material from Region 7. We changed a few of the slides, but it's practically the same information. I may present it in a different manner. We would definitely appreciate your feedback at the end because we want to make this training successful for you all. We want to give you what you need to manage your cooperative agreement. Throughout the training, please put your questions in. Let me know if I'm going too slow. Let me know if I'm going too fast because I want to make this as successful as we can. So we'll get started. The major things we're going to go over today are the key terms and conditions that are on your cooperative agreement, and try to make sure that you understand what they mean to you, when and how and what changes you can make, and definitely want to talk about what happens at the end of your cooperative agreement, the closeout process. I'm sure all of you are aware, I don't know how many are first-time grantees, but there is some responsibility when you accept a federal grant. You're responsible for complying with all the terms and conditions. And with EPA assistance whenever needed, we definitely want you to efficiently and effectively manage your project to completion and comply with all of the reporting requirements in your grant. Throughout this presentation, and when you talk with a lot of EPA staff, you will hear them use the word grant, but there's actually a difference between a grant and a cooperative agreement. Grant is just much quicker and cleaner to say. Most of the urban waters grants that you have are actually cooperative agreements, and that just means that there's substantial involvement from EPA. You have the monitoring part. You do a lot of communication with your project officer and your technical representatives. There's a lot of coordination of work within the project, so that's why it is a cooperative agreement. So if I say the word grant throughout this presentation, I'm really referring to a cooperative agreement. EPA overall does not award a lot of grants because we tend to be substantially involved in almost all of our projects. And kind of going through what is actually substantial involvement. On this slide, there is a lot of different things that could be used as substantial involvement, but actually, in my experience here, the major ones are the prior review and approval of your project phases or substantial provisions of any contracts that you're having with those grant dollars, and collaboration on the scope of work. Those are the major areas that we get involved with as it relates to the cooperative agreements. I don't think we get involved with your organizational structures, your staffing, your mode of operations. If it's a brand new grantee who has never had a federal grant, they may ask us for assistance in those areas, and we're definitely here to assist. But routinely, we only collaborate on the development of the scope of work and prior review of the different phases of your project. So the section we're going to get into now is the actual terms and conditions on your cooperative agreement, and try to break down what they really mean. And just one note, throughout the grant, I know that you may be the project manager on that particular grant, but in all instances, EPA holds the award recipient responsible. If there's any inaction or any action we have to take, it's never against the project manager. It's always against that award recipient, the entity that we provided our federal funds to. Basically, your conditions in your grant are usually broken down in two components. You have your administrative reporting requirements, and then you have your programmatic and your program project specific requirements. The administrative reporting requirements are usually those where you coordinate with the grant management offices in the regions. And your programmatic requirements is when you coordinate with your program and or your project officer. And we'll go through each of those. Some of the key conditions to know during your project, you will always have a sufficient progress condition. I know that when you develop your work plans, you have your milestones, you have the activities you're going to do by when, and your project officers and the grant specialists are always reviewing sufficient progress throughout the life of your project. Timely payment requests, your reporting, your minority business enterprise and women business enterprise reporting, any subawards that you may have. All of our conditions roll down to those subawardees. Any contracts you may have, same thing. Our requirements roll down to them. I'm not sure how many of you have quality assurance requirements in your grant, but there are always QAPP requirements. Food policy requirements if you're having conferences where you have food. And then you have your peer review requirements, and we'll go through each of those individually. Sufficient progress. once your grant is awarded, the grant specialist and the project officer have certain monitoring requirements that they have to have. The conditions, your programmatic condition will identify when your progress reports are due, if they're due semi-annually or annually, and you'll coordinate those dates with your project officer. And hopefully you've already coordinated what you have to identify in each of those progress reports. If that project officer wants you to do each milestone, the funds spent on the milestones, any drawdowns that you've had, and where those apply against your work plan milestones. But that should be worked out in advance. You should have all of that defined in your work plan before your grant is awarded. And there are always reasons why you may not be able to meet a milestone. That's why communication with your project officer is important. You can always ask for extensions. There's always justifications to do that. Just always communicate with your project officer. But hopefully you will have everything set up in a way up front where you can easily provide your sufficient progress on your semi-annual or annual reports that you submit. Timely payment requests. EPA, because of unliquidated obligations and the way that Congress looks at our grant dollars, we always want our grantees to be drawing down at least quarterly. And that's when you've expended, when you've done work where you need to pay your staff or pay for contracts or pay for any work that has been done. But we definitely do not want you to draw down if you don't have anything to disperse the funds to. But drawing down quarterly would be the ideal. If you don't have anything to draw down for in a particular quarter, let your project officer know that. I don't want you to think that, okay, do we have questions? Somebody's supposed to be queuing me on my questions. Sharon. Okay, you got it? Okay, thanks, Sharon. We definitely want you to draw down quarterly if you can. You can draw down more often if it's necessary. I know some grantees draw down monthly. You draw down per payroll period, so that's great. But if you don't have a need to draw down, please let your project officer know. Communication with your project officer is the most important. What reports do I have to submit? You have your programmatic performance reports. And I think someone had a question and Sharon responded that they're due semi-annually. And when you got your grant award, hopefully what needs to be placed in those reports was identified in that grant award. You also have your administrative reporting requirements, which are predominantly your minority business and women business enterprise reporting, which is now done annually. There was a requirement that they be done semi-annually, but now it's just an annual report at the end of your project. And hopefully most of you are familiar with the MBE-WBE report. If you're not, you can always contact your grant specialist. The other report that's an administrative requirement is your financial report or your FFR. And that can be, if you've never completed a financial status report, that could be something that could be difficult. Please consult with your grant specialist before you start filling it out. And I think most of the urban water grants are one-year grants, so you would actually submit your FFR at the end, and that's really your expenditures that you've made on your grant.
Actually, Donna, this is Sun. They're two-year project periods typically. Great. I mean, some folks vary that, you know, some of them are 1 year, but typically they're 2-year project periods.
And in that case, you will have to submit an FFR at the end of that first year, and then you'll submit your final at the end of the second year.
Donna, one question was posted from Felicia. Is there a variety of frequency of reporting? It sounds like she's under the impression she needs to file quarterly reports.
And I'm not sure if she's referring to quarterly reports for the administrative ones or the programmatic. Can you clarify that, Felicia?
Mm-hmm.
I am not aware of any quarterly reporting requirement, definitely not on the administrative grant side, unless some programmatic condition was placed on a grant for a particular award. Okay. I think she's addressing a programmatic report. So I don't know what region Felicia's in, but she might want to check with her project officer.
Yeah. Another question came in from Chris about what information needs to be included in that semi-annual report. Are there different categories? Is there an actual form to follow?
The semi-annual for?
I think programmatic.
Oh, the programmatic, okay.
He says, or are there categories that we need to, information categories that are expected, or do we simply describe our progress?
You know, hopefully someone from a program can address that, but I know from my history, from what I've seen, the best way to do that is for that programmatic report parameters to be defined up front. The project officer.
Hi. Hi, Donna. This is Sharon.
Hi, Sharon.
So what I would suggest is that person talk with their project officer, Chris. There is an outline that project officer can provide you with what they would like to see in your progress report. And generally, you want to follow the tasks in your work plan and report accordingly. According to those tasks. So you would report what you've done for that, 6-month period, the funds you've expended, any problems, any successes that you had over that period. So really your project officer can provide you with a good example of what they would like in a progress report.
Thank you, Sharon, and I agree with that. And the minority business and the financial status report, those are actually forms. Those are actually EPA forms that you have to fill out. So the standard is already set. And if you have questions about those forms, please contact your grant specialist. And I think we may have already gone over quite a bit of this. At the end, when you have to submit whatever your due date for your programmatic reports, routinely you have 30 days after that to get it in. Since I don't know what your programmatic requirements are per grant, you would need to take a look at those, and if you have any questions, contact your project officer. Sharon, do you know routinely, is there an additional 30-day window that they have to get it in?
For the progress reports? Yes.
Okay.
And if if you're having any trouble, like Donna mentioned, just contact your project officer, and I'm sure they will be willing to work with you. And someone asked, what does TC mean? That's terms and conditions.
You know, on this particular slide that's up right now, Sharon, I actually think that TC stands for your technical contact. Because I think in some regions they may have a project officer, but they may also have a technical staff that they're also working with.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay. And you always want to get feedback from your project officer or your technical contact. I know EPA deals a lot with just email, but you want some verification that they've received it and that it's approved or accepted, whatever standard that project officer uses. And this next slide kind of defines what is routinely included in a progress report. As Sharon said earlier, a summary of your work plan accomplishments for that particular reporting period, You can also talk about any challenges that you've had, especially if you ran into some problems and there were some delays. You can address that in your progress report. And one good thing that I know helps the project officer and also helps the grant specialist, if you do a comparison of budget and actual costs. If at the time your progress report is due, if you've drawn down X number of dollars, if you could apply kind of where those dollars went as it's based on your work plan task. That also gives that project officer and that grant specialist an idea of kind of where the money that you've drawn down, where it's been spent. And
There's a question comes up, can you get a copy of this presentation? Yes, we can upload it on Basecamp, and we'll also upload a link so you can watch the video of it.
And the next slide about not submitting the reports. You know, anytime you don't meet a condition of the grant, there's noncompliance. But please understand that having a conversation with your project officer or your grant specialist about any delays or any problems that you're having will assist with that. Because you may get an informal extension. A lot of the time, if you need more time to get something in, your project officer or your grant specialist can approve that. The administrative requirements, the MBE and the financial status report, we can give you extensions on those. And you would have to work with your project officer on any extensions that you need on the programmatic report. Just please let them know. Let them know in advance if you can. I think most grantees know when they're not going to be able to meet a deadline. Just talk with your project officer or your grant specialist and negotiate another date. Any noncompliance, EPA has a grantee compliance database, and across the nation in all regions and AA ships, any noncompliance goes into that database by grantee, and we can all look into that database and see what actions have been taken. I think there's a question, is there a sample of good and bad progress reports? And I'm assuming you're talking about your programmatic progress report. So I'll see if Sharon or Sun is aware of any good examples.
This is Sun. I would just going back to what Sharon had shared earlier, that I think your best resource on kind of the information to include and the layout of it even. I think Cindy in the chat box noted pictures are always appreciated and helpful with those reports. That to really communicate with your project officer or your technical contact as to what they're looking for in the progress report. I also encourage you to take a look at your actual agreement that lays out your programmatic terms and conditions for your cooperative agreement. It lays out the basic information that your semi-annual report needs to include. But I know even in some questions that I've fielded with project officers, I've provided some examples of kind of what I think is model project or progress reports that kind of captures the information that we're looking for on getting an update on your project. So your POs, your technical contacts have these examples to share, and so I encourage you to just, ask your PO if there is a couple examples, good examples that they can share with you so that you can get an idea of what is a good progress report to submit.
Okay, Deanna, I think we have quite a few questions that we need to catch up on. I don't know if Christian's question about a copy of the measures table.
I think, Cindy, you're mentioning that you have, but it sounds like, Cindy, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like that's something that you use as a program officer, and so if there is such measure table, people really should go back to their own officers to find that out. Is that right? That they'd like them to use? Cindy? The other question that came up while I wait for Cindy to respond is, do we get points off when we ask for extensions to submit progress reports? Alberto is asking. Are grantees penalized in any way for needing an extension?
They're definitely not penalized when it comes to the administrative reporting, the MBE, WBE, and the FSRs, the financial status reports. I would have to, and I think that would be the same for a programmatic report, but I'll have to let someone from the program respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
The question is if points are taken off, okay, I see it in the chat box now. Yeah. Again, I mean, I think Cindy captures kind of the spirit of working with your POs about extensions. I mean, from the programmatic side of things, of kind of, you know, how we look of the national, from the national perspective, there isn't kind of like this, you know, points off kind of view that we have with that. It really, I think the point to hone in on here is that if you expect there to be a delay with your progress report, to be in communication about that with your PO, and they'll work with you.
And so Cindy is suggesting that if they can't get the measures table from their program officer's grantee, that she's available, folks can contact her, Cindy. So maybe, Cindy, if we can put your email address in here in the chat box, that'd be great.
And Deanna, I think someone from Region 8 provided a comment on the extension request. I think it's April.
Yes, she's just reiterating, grantees are not penalized. However, when it comes to EPA grants, baseline reports and database may include that the grant is not on track of established milestones. So somewhere in the EPA database, it is being tracked that it's not up to date, but you're not penalized per se.
Right, and I know on the administrative baseline side, yeah, the dates may not jive, but you can also put in comments, you know, that the grantee requested an extension and this was the justification. So it may reflect that, but you can also explain why. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the same in the programmatic baseline.
Yes, it is, Donna. And this is Sharon. And it's really not that you're being penalized. It's just that you're being accurate on the status of that grant. And I think the main point is if you stay in contact with your project officer, you should really have a smooth run with your grant, no problem. So.
All right. And Cindy, thank you for uploading your email. It's in the chat box, everybody.
Okay, this next slide talks about your final performance report. And as I'm sure all of you are aware, at the end of your grant, you have a 90-day window to get in all of your final reports. It's specifically important as it relates to your final status report, because if your grant ends, say, September 30th, you may still have bills and invoices and things you have to pay. So you have that 90-day window to take care of all of those expenses, and then you can complete your final financial status report. And I think you have the same for your programmatic reports and the same for your MBE, WBE. Just be cognizant of the fact that at the end of your project, that's the end of the work. You can't accrue any additional cost, but you can pay those costs that were accrued up to that point. And you have the 90 days to pull all of that together and get all of your final reports in.
Okay, Felicia has a comment. There's no requirement for a semi-annual report in my cooperative agreement, nor do I see this in the general TNC on the EPA website.
So this is Sun. Felicia, if you could let me know who your project officer is, I'd like to follow up with him or her.
All right.
Okay, and the next slide is just on your annual MBE-WBE report. And when it comes to the MBE-WBE reporting, for those of you who have not seen that particular form, it's just a requirement for if you have any funds budgeted for procurement. EPA wants to know if any of that procurement has gone to a minority business or a women-owned business. Or if you have over $300 or more budgeted for supplies. There are certain requirements that triggers for you to do that reporting. And those are the things. If you have funds, any amount budgeted for procurement, if you have $3,000 or more budgeted for supplies, and or if your subawardees are going to spend funds that meets those two requirements. You will have to submit the annual MBE-WBE report. Subgrantees and subawardees. We talked about those a little. I think the key thing to remember is any subgrantee, all of EPA's rules and policies roll downhill. So if you have a subgrantee, all of the grant conditions and requirements are also a part of what that subgrantee has. You're accountable for the actions of your subgrantees. EPA routinely has no connection with the subgrantees because we have no financial or work-related relationship with them. That's between you and your subgrantee. We will hold our grantee responsible because you're the one that we have the financial connection with. So as you're working with your subgrantees, just make sure they're also aware of all of your grant requirements. If you have reporting coming in from them, you may want to look at the date that you have it due to EPA and have it due from your subgrantees an earlier date so that you can meet your EPA deadlines. And the same thing falls with contracts. They're your contractors, but all of our federal requirements will roll downhill. And also one of the requirements of our grantees is that you have procurement policies for your organization. And if we conduct a review, we would look at those policies and ensure that you followed them with any contracts that you have awarded with EPA federal dollars. The food policy. I'm not sure how many of the urban water grants actually have this issue, but there are certain things that the project officer must verify before you're allowed to spend federal dollars on. If you're having a conference and you want refreshments or snacks or drinks or something at that, or drinks at that conference, there are certain thresholds you must meet, and that project officer has to complete a form and make it part of the funding recommendation before we'll even make that award. The requirements on that have gotten stricter and stricter as the years have gone by. Routinely, we ask grantees if there's any way you can get other funding for that. It's probably better for you to do it that way, but it's available. But just understand you and your project officer will have to negotiate that up front. Quality assurance. I'm sure all of you are aware of if you're doing any type of environmental measurements, if you're doing any sampling with EPA federal funds, you have to have an approved quality assurance project plan. Routinely, we can award our grants without the QAPP being approved up front, but you have to have it approved before you go out and do those activities. And then, and again, your project officer can explain all of that to you. Recently, EPA has a new QA competency requirement. If your grant is $200,000 or above, there's now a requirement that you show that whoever is doing your measuring in your organization is competent, i.e., they've taken some type of training or those type of requirements, and your project officer will need to get those as part of the grant award and have that on file with us. So if you do have a grant that exceeds $200,000 and you are doing environmental measurements, talk to your project officer about the QA competency requirement. It should have been a condition on your grant, but initially you may not have thought your grant was going to exceed that amount. Once you get an amendment that gives you additional funds that kick you into that $200,000 and above category, you'll have to meet the QA competency requirement at that time. The peer review process. So if your grant has documents or publications, videos, audio that you want to share with the public, please talk with your project officer or your technical contact first. There are requirements on documents that have been produced with federal dollars, and your project officers will know what those requirements are. So before you distribute anything, please, and I think in your records you want to make sure that you have it documented, that your project officer has reviewed it and accepted or approved it. I think you want to have that as documentation in your files also. Hopefully none of the grantees on this webinar will ever get to this point, but if any of your terms and conditions are not met, there are certain steps that EPA can take. All of the negotiations will start with your project officer. As I've said, if you're not able to meet any condition, hopefully you've had a conversation with your project officer, you've gotten extensions, there's an understanding why you haven't. But there are remedies that EPA has if you don't meet those conditions. And there's been no communication. We don't know what's happening with our grant funds. That's when we have to take these enforcement actions in a way. We can stop drawdowns where we can stop the ACH drawdowns. You won't be able to get to any remaining funds. We can come back and disallow any costs that you've already drawn down and require repayment. We can suspend or terminate your grant award, and we can also place documentation in the grantee compliance database that anybody within EPA could see that would hinder you getting any further awards from us. And this next slide is just kind of survival tips. Comply with your terms and conditions. And in the instances where you can't meet one, have that conversation with your project officer or your technical contact or your grant specialist. It'll save time in the long run. EPA will not have to pursue any type of enforcement action, and we won't have to get into returning funds or not giving you additional grants. Just remember, communication is key to meeting all of your conditions, because I think eventually we all want your project to be successful. We want the grant to be successful. And I think if we're talking throughout that process, we'll be able to do that. So this particular section, does anybody have any questions? I see Cindy and Deb typing, so we'll just hold a second, Deanna, and see what their questions are.
In the meantime, I'm wondering, can we open up the poll to see what if people have been in touch with their program officers? I've opened up a poll. If you could just answer it. Have you been in touch with your EPA program officer or technical contact since your grant started? so give it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. All right. All right, can you all see that? All right. Sounds like most folks have been in touch with their program officer multiple times. About 30 of you out of just a couple have not, just a handful have not yet, 5 people. So clearly that's the next step for you. A lot of the answers seem to be sitting in your program officer, so definitely reach out.
Yes, definitely. But I think it's great to see that so many already have. That's good.
Yep. A question? Okay. So some comments on the, no questions per se. Great idea to have an open communication with your PO before you assume that you can make any changes to your plans. So anything about modifying the scope of your project, discuss it with them first.
Great, and I think that's a great segue into this next section about making changes to your project.
Mm-hmm.
What changes can you make to your program or your project? You have work plan changes, you have your budget changes, and then you have time changes. In most instances, your project officer can approve minor changes. If you and your project officer, if you've identified in your work plan the staff that's going to be working on the project, those are that's what we consider minor changes. Minor rebudgeting changes is when any budget change is less than 10% of your total project, moving it within categories that you already have what we consider open. For instance, if you have funds in salary, equipment, supplies, if the budget changes are 10% or less, that's a minor amendment. Just discuss it with your project officer first, and your project officer can approve it. One of the things that's not considered minor, say if you have a budget and you have funds in salaries, supplies, and equipment, but you didn't have any funds in travel, and now you want to move funds into travel, that's not considered a minor change because that category was never what we considered open. So that would be more of a major change. Mm-hmm. And also, you can move funds from your indirect cost category into direct, but not vice versa.
Mm-hmm. A question from Carrie. Donna, I did not see anything in my cooperative agreement about getting approval from EPA for public information. We've already passed out flyers for an event, and we're about to do a press release. Am I in violation?
I would say Carrie needs to contact her project officer ASAP.
There you go.
I wanted to see if anybody had questions on informal amendments. Or Sharon or Son, did you have a comment on that? I'm not sure how the programs really handle that. Sharon, you may know how you handle it here in Region 6.
Donna, this is Son.
Yes.
I'm not familiar with informal amendments.
Okay.
Hi, Donna. This is Sharon. Yes, generally, just what you went over, any minor changes, it's very easy, for the grantee to contact the project officer, and generally we can approve that without, a whole lot of trouble. So I would say any question that you have, your first point of contact would be that project officer or the TC as listed in your slides.
Great. And moving on to formal amendments, if there's a significant change in your grant where the award official may have to re-sign it if it's a significant change, and those include increases and decrease amendments. We don't routinely have a lot of decrease amendments, but if there's an increase amendment to your grant, And especially when we're adding new funds. If you have a 2-year grant and we're at the end of that grant and you're adding new funds for that second year, those are considered significant changes, and you'll actually get a new award document for those. Time extensions, we routinely send a new award document reflecting the new time frame of your project. No cost amendments, changing or adding work. I don't know if we routinely send a new grant document for those. If you request it, we can. But sometimes that can be just a change on your work plan, and that can be made there, and we can add it to our files, and you can add it to your files. Just check with your grant specialist will know when they actually want a formal amendment processed where we're actually changing your grant award. As it reflects on increases to your grants, since these are competitive grants, there are certain restrictions on adding funds. If it's just giving you the balance of what your first application was, if it's a 2-year application, a 2-year grant, and we're giving you your funds that were still owed to give you your total, that's one type of increase. But if your total project came in at $500 and we gave you that, and for some reason we needed to give you more, we would have to take a look at that, because since this is a competitive grant program, there are stipulations on amendments as it relates to adding new funds. Definitely you and your project officer can talk through that first. But otherwise, extension requests, time extensions, those types of things, when those formal amendments need to be made, your project officer will make those actions, and the grants office will send you new grant awards to reflect those. And again, I think between Sharon, Sun, and I, we've said this so many times. Talk to your PO or talk to your TC. Again, talking about your task and your milestones and your deadlines, if you have any changes that you need to make to your work plan. Some of the changes may require additional paperwork and EPA approval. Your project officer will let you know when that's necessary. Most of the time on extension requests, that is a formal amendment, and the grant, I know here in Region 6, our grants office will ask the project officer for a justification, and the project officer will need to get that from you. If the project officer approves it and sends the extension request to us, we normally make it, and you'll get a new formal amendment from us. If you think a budget change is necessary, talk with your PO. That could require a formal amendment. Your PO will let you know. And again, we've already talked about extension requests. If you feel like you need more time, contact your PO or your TC. I would only stress that you request the extension prior to your current award ending. We can definitely work with you if it has already ended, but the preference is not to. If you could get that request in so that we can process it in time, that would be great. Do we have any questions about amendments? I'm not seeing anything in the chat box.
No.
Okay, we will move on. And you guys, please let me know if the pace isn't working for you. That would be great. So at the end of your grant, we have to close it out. And the major thing is ensuring that all of our technical and administrative requirements have been met. On the programmatic side, you had any deliverables that were due on the project. Those hopefully were negotiated up front and are identified in your work plan. You have your final performance report. On the financial side, you have your final FFR, and you have your final MBE-WBE report. And like I explained earlier, you have that 90-day window to get those in, but if you can get them in earlier, that's great. We'll definitely accept them. What records must you keep? Definitely keep your grant and all revisions that you've had to it. Any key correspondence between you and your project officer or you and your grant specialist where you were making requests and they approved it via email, you definitely want to keep those records. Any financial and property type records, you want to keep those. Keep copies of all of your required reports that you submitted to us. We will also have them here, but you definitely need to have them there with you. And generally, the retention period for those are 3 years. Any questions on that section? Deanna, I'm going to wait and see what Alberto's question is.
You bet.
Roberto, all of your financial records is when you make drawdowns from EPA, say if you made a drawdown of $500, you should have $500 of something that tells us what that drawdown was for. If it was time cards, if you purchased a piece of equipment, the support that you have for each draw, you should keep those records. Because if you are audited, if you are reviewed by EPA, those are the records we would need to see. You always should have records to support the draws that you made on your grant.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Sharon. I'm going to move on to the next section. Actually, I didn't know that slide was in there. How does my grant management on this cooperative agreement affect future funding? From EPA side, and Deanna, I will let you address if there's anything on y'all side. For us, mostly the mismanagement part. If we have grantees that are not doing their reporting, they've had a review and they did not have the documentation to support their draws, all of that information is placed in what EPA calls the Grantee Compliance Database. There's a national database that we put all information about any deficiencies as it relates to a grantee into. And all of the grant specialists, before they make new grant awards, they should be consulting that database to see if anybody across the nation has put anything in it related to any grantee. And if there is something in there, they can contact that grant specialist in that other region and say, has it been resolved? Is everything corrected? If not, they will let that project officer know, hey, you're recommending an award to grantee A, but there's some issues in the grantee database. You may want to reconsider. So that is really how it affects your future funding. Now, if it's gotten to the point where EPA has had to request funds back, hopefully EPA hasn't had to pursue suspension and debarment, but that's a database that we also check. We always check the suspension and debarment database before we make any grant. So not complying to your requirements on your current grant could definitely affect future grants in that way, because we track all deficiencies in databases that the project officers and or the grant specialists can check or should check before making any new awards. And I don't know if there's anything in the Urban Waters RFP that talks about future funding. I would definitely have to let Son or Sharon address that, but that's how we address it from the grants administrative side.
Yeah, so this is Sundana. It is noted in the RFP where this may remind folks of in putting together your proposals. One of the evaluation criteria is past performance, and it is noted in there that that proposals are evaluated based on the applicant's response to the evaluation criteria of past performance, or criterion of past performance, but the agency also has the option to look at other resources such as the grantee compliance database. So, so that's it is something that our reviewers have the option and the flexibility to pull up an applicant's to look at an applicant's record in the grantee compliance database.
Okay, great. Thanks, Son. I thought most RFPs did have that in them now. This next slide is a slide that I added towards the end that I just want to talk through each bullet. Recently, I know here in Region 6 in my office, we've gone through quite a few audits. And actually, I got this slide from an Office of Grants and Debarment, the national database page, kind of the 10 most common audit findings. And I'm hoping that walking through these will help all of us to avoid these. We talked a lot about reporting, untimely reporting submissions, lack of documentation, and that kind of goes back to the reference I made to Alberto earlier. You got to have your documentation to support all your draws. You need to keep that. You need to keep it for 3 years. Inadequate time and effort reports, or definitely, I call these more time cards. One of the areas that there's been quite a few audit findings in lately is the time cards that recipients have or do not have. If you have personnel in your grants, definitely look at the administrative requirement, making sure that the employee and the supervisor is signing the time cards. If you're getting paid by multiple EPA grants, make sure that time card reflects the time that you're charging to each grant. Make sure that the time cards are actual hours. A lot of grantees that we found tend to kind of prorate across the board how their employees are getting paid, and they don't come back and reconcile that for actual hours. Definitely make sure that you're checking that. Inadequate reports. A lot of our financial status reports, it shows the amount of money that EPA gave the grantee, and in that final FFR, it shows what they've spent. But when we go look at the drawdowns, those numbers don't match. Commingling of funds. I don't know how many of you have multiple EPA grants. Just always remember, you can't commingle those funds. They're all independent and separate by themselves. Excess cash on hand. Understand that if you negotiate a work plan for $100, but somehow you got all the work done, and for $80, don't just assume that that $20 is just there for you to do what you want to do with it. You can always go back to your project officer and see if there's more you can do within the scope of that work. Otherwise, that final FSR should show that you're returning that $20 back to EPA. Unallowable costs. Definitely pay attention to what your work plan says, your categories in your budget, and make sure you're spending those EPA dollars accordingly. Inappropriate changes. I think we talked about that earlier. Always be in communication with your project officer or your technical contact as it relates to changes on your grants. And conflicts of interest. I think you're all aware of what this is. As you're doing subawards, as you're doing contracts, Make sure there's no conflicts of interest within your organization, the organization that EPA provided their grant dollars to. And those are just some of the key areas that has been noted as OIG and EPA grant offices have been going out doing administrative grant reviews and formal audits. So I just wanted to give you guys a list of these. If you have any questions or need more details or need good examples or anything on any of them, your grant offices will have them. Your project officers can assist you. Just kind of keep these areas in mind as you're implementing your EPA grant award. And the next slide, we've kind of talked about this, possible actions for non-compliant recipients. Like I said, we put information in the grantee compliance database. And at each step, there's just different things that we can do. A lot of issues can be worked out between you and your PO or you and your grants office, where we can, if we find that there was an issue, most things can be fixed. Just alert your project officer as soon as you can, or alert your grant specialist so that we can correct it. I actually had a grantee that contacted me not too long ago. They made a draw and they actually drew down 100% of what the grant amount was, and it was an error. But we worked with the Las Vegas Finance Center to get the money back in there. There's normally things that we can do to correct errors if you let us know about them early enough. High-risk conditions on grant awards. If there is consistent non-compliance with the grant requirements, there are things that EPA can do. We can put conditions on the grant. We can require that they be reimbursable. You have to do the activities first. Tell us what they were. Your project officer has to approve them, and then we allow the draws. We can always withhold payment of funds. We can issue a stop work order on your grant, or we could terminate or annul the award. So there are actions that we have on our behalf for continued non-compliance. And most of them come into play is when there's no communication with the grantee also. And that is actually the end of the formal presentation, Deanna. We'll see if anybody has any questions or anything that we need to go over or provide more clarification on.
Again, we will be posting this. If you'd like to share this presentation with anybody else in your organization who could benefit from all of it or portions of it, I'll be posting the link. As soon as I can get it up on YouTube, I'll link it and post a message on Basecamp. We'll also post on Basecamp the slides, a PDF of the slides themselves. Sounds like that might be useful for some of you. So. And I will, while folks are still typing, as soon as I close the meeting room, you should be directed to a evaluation form, just a real brief survey. Sometimes firewall issues give us troubles, though. So on the bottom left box under Note, you see the URL. If you would take just 30 seconds, literally, to fill out some of the multiple choice questions, it would be really helpful feedback for all of us. So thank you. Anything else you'd like to add, Sun?
Well, I'm just looking at the chat box. There's a question from Jonathan. Did all of our cooperative agreements begin at the same time for this new 2-year cooperative agreement / grant? No. So the correct me if I'm wrong, Donna, but I believe your project start date is when your final award is issued. So it's that issuance date that is the actual official start date of your cooperative agreement. Is that correct?
That's correct. Every grant that was sent out should have a project budget period start and end date.
Okay. So yeah, so that because the award processing and issuance was done by the EPA separate EPA regional offices, um, the the 2014 cooperative agreements have varying start and end dates based on when their final awards were issued.
Christian, you asked about the slide for the upcoming mandatory webinars. I want to make sure to clarify in your terms and conditions, you are required to attend, I think it's 2 webinars, one of which is this very one. Is that correct, Sun?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Yeah.
How many mandatory webinars? Just to clarify that not every webinar that we offer or peer call through the Learning Network is mandatory, but rather that you're required to attend 2 over the life of your grant period. I think it's 2. Is that correct, Sun? One of which is this grants management one.
Exactly, that's correct.
Okay. So, yeah, as long as you you attend one other, you'll be good with your grant terms. So we'd love to have you at any and all of them, but you're not required to be at all of them. But there, I've just put it up here so you can see it.
And I see the comment from Peg. Thanks, Peg, for that clarification. So, so Peg actually indicates that the actual date of award does not necessarily have to be the start date of the grant. And she says, for example, we awarded grants in June, but some of our projects do not want to start until September and October. So yeah, so I think that corroborates with what Donna said earlier, that it's what is in your work plan as your project schedule that indicates what the actual project start date is.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Start typing now so we know you're out there. All right, and for these trainings, if we do ask that you register, just so we have a sense of who will be there, and I can send out call-in or webinar information. So you can do that. I've posted the link on Basecamp. It should be coming to your inbox. Otherwise, you can also email me directly if you don't have access to that link or you are not yet on Basecamp. And I'm right now typing my email address. Okay, and it sounds like maybe, all right, I don't know if there's any other questions. So again, if you could take it, I just uploaded my my email there on the note box below. And there it is. So I think there's just a slight delay, so my apologies for that. All right. I guess we'll just give a couple of minutes. There's some folks still typing, but otherwise let me just direct you to that URL down in the note box. If you could just fill out that evaluation, I'd appreciate it. I can see some already coming in. So, all right, Donna, thank you so much for the webinar. I really appreciate you leading folks through this. I think hopefully it was helpful to everybody. And I guess if you took anything away from today, is contact your program officer. They have all the answers.
And definitely give us feedback, because I understand, this may be an ongoing process for this particular grant type. So we definitely want to make these trainings, give you what you need to help you manage your cooperative agreement.
Absolutely.
Yes, definitely.
All right. I will go ahead and end the meeting, and yes, you should be forwarded to that URL for the evaluation form. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Appreciate you joining us.